And God said, "Let there be
The
light."
Lord says, "Let my people go."
I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
This is the Talkin' Bible podcast.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Talkin' Bible with Rohan Bell and Jeannie Schwartz. Hello Jeannie.
Hi Pastor Rohan. This has been a tough week.
How are you feeling?
I feel good.
You feel good?
Yes.
We're talking about some tough discipleship stuff.
Yeah.
Real,
yes.
I call this rubber hit the road Christianity, this stuff.
Yeah, I call it Jeannie wants to run away moment.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, this is not easy stuff. This is what Christian life is really about. Discipleship is really about. There is a cost. It requires something of us.
Yeah, it does. And
Yeah.
today's passage I find confusing.
Okay. Yeah, this is confusing because this is
And
now
confronting.
Talking about, yep. Because we're now talking about how do we what do we do
You
in a
can't even
relationship?
say
No,
it.
yeah. Well, what do we do in a relationship with a person where we can't get? We're not seeing breakthrough. Like this last episode we talked about the breakthrough, the relationships challenges, and how to break through those relationships and not be angry with your brother and settle things. But this seems to be upping the ante a bit, doesn't it?
Yes. This you've actually titled Correcting Another Believer.
Okay, that's what it is. Yeah.
And it's hard to say.
Yeah, it
because
is.
it's hard to do.
Yep, that's right. What's the process in bringing correction to another person?
And what gives me the right to think I should
All
correct
those
somebody
things.
else?
Yeah, exactly. So we have two perspectives here. We get our sinful nature wants to correct everyone else, and our godly nature goes, "Oh, it's not my place to correct anyone else."
I see my sinful nature just wants to join in with everybody else.
Oh, well, that too.
Doesn't want to correct anybody.
Well, yeah, okay, just join in with well, what I meant by correct everyone else is I'm going to be right and I'm going to put you're wrong and I'm right kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And here we are talking about a process that Jesus puts in place for how do you bring correction, because there will be times when correction is necessary. How do we bring it in a way that honors God?
And this appears in Matthew, right?
Yes, it does.
In any of the others?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. No, I'm pretty sure. The term binding and loosing, which we'll see in this passage, actually appears a couple of chapters before this. I think it appears in Matthew 16 as well. And it's repeated here in Matthew 18. But other than that, no, I don't think it appears anywhere else.
All right. Okay, let's get stuck into it. Verse 15, if your brother sins against you, go tell him his fault between you and him alone, because that's going to go well. If he listens to you, you have won your brother. But if he won't listen, take one or two others with you, so that by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, every fact may be established. If he doesn't pay attention to them, tell the church. If he doesn't pay attention even to the church, let him be like a Gentile. That sounds like an insult. I guess it's meant to be.
A pagan or a tax collector,
and
yeah?
a tax collector.
Yes,
Truly,
maybe.
I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be have bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will have been loosed in heaven. Again, truly I tell you, if 2 of you on earth agree about any matter that you pray for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there among them. There's a lot in this because
Yes, that's right.
It talks about correcting another believer, yet then it spins to be something about prayer, which a lot of people use in prayer.
I use it in prayer, and I'd be interested. I haven't done a study on this. I'm just looking I picked up when you said when you pray for. I'm looking at the ESV. It says if 2 or more agree on anything they ask. It doesn't mention prayer. I'd like to see whether or not the individual word was prayer. I suspect that it may not be. What version have you got there?
I have the Christian Standard
CSB.
Bible.
That's usually so the NLT says verse. Where are we?
I have read it as that you ask for as well. It will be done for you.
Yeah.
But I suppose
so
asking is
whatever you-
praying in a way.
In a sense, yes, but that would be a different word. If a person, yes, I'm just trying to find. Whatever you ask is what the NLT says as well. So I would be hesitant to just automatically assume that this is about prayer. I don't think prayer fits the context. I don't think that's the point you're making. He seems to be talking about a church relationship thing, and then
Yes.
suddenly we take it to talk about prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if you took this out of context, a lot of people might use these verses in prayer meetings.
As a prayer meeting thing, and multiple times. And in fact, that's why I was mentioning the fact that the whole thing of the binding and loosing is mentioned
Okay.
2 chapters before as well. But
We'll just go straight there
Go
because
there.
you're talking about it.
Okay,
What does it say in the other chapter?
the other chapter is, I think it's Matthew chapter 16. just going to see whether it's 16. I shouldn't. It's when it's Matthew chapter 16, when Jesus takes the disciples to Caesarea, and then he says, "Who did the disciples say they are?" And Peter famously says, "You're the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus says, "I tell you this: blessed are you, Peter, son of Jonah. I give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth." So that's the other time this is used. This idiom of binding and loosing is used 2 times that seem very different. I would say that the second one we just read, the Matthew 18 one that we're in, is like a subset of the broader one. It seems to be in Matthew 16 that Jesus is giving Peter a significant amount of authority here. There's a binding and loosing authority that he has. And then in Matthew 18, we assume that binding and loosing authority is prayer. I think it's more to do with church governance and authority. And that's what most of Christian history has understood this passage to be about, and Peter's words as well.
Yeah, because when I read it, I thought, does this mean that whatever I think should happen in the church should be agreed upon in heaven, and whatever I think shouldn't happen in the church, heaven also agrees that shouldn't happen in a church?
Yeah, that's right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, and that's the risk with some of the extreme teaching on prayer is somehow we bend God's will through our prayer. God goes, "Oh, okay, I wasn't going to do it that way, but they've prayed about it now, so I better make it work." That just seems. But that's kind of what I see some people teach about in prayer here. Whereas I think in its context, Jesus has delegated Peter an authority on behalf of the church. And, church scholars understood that to be an apostolic authority that Peter had, and the Roman Catholic Church could take that right down their papal line or whatever. But the apostles and church leadership were given an authority to shape things and break things and allow things. So the whole idea of binding and loosing, that was a common idiom. Rabbis used it all the time. It was an authority rabbis had, not something Matthew made up or Jesus made up, and it just meant to permit or forbid. So they would be scouring the Jewish law, trying to work out what you could and couldn't do. Oh, I'm permitting. The rabbis would get together in council and they'd go, "This is the decision we've made. You can do this and you can't do that." That's forbidding or permitting certain aspects of the law. So they knew that. So Jesus is now upping that rabbinic authority and giving it to Peter and saying, "That's what it's going to be like. I'm going to give you authority to judge what's right and wrong in the kingdom." So now when we bring that back into this context of Matthew 18, where there's a relationship breakdown in the church, I think the best way to read it is that he's saying the church leadership, because you're telling it to the church, and the church leadership, they have an authority to bind and loose, to forbid and permit, and they will make the decision about what's best for the church with regard to whether or not this person needs to be put out from fellowship.
Can you just make something clear to me? Binding is forbidding?
Binding is forbidding, yes. Binding is not allowing something. Loosing is allowing something. Okay,
because normally in life, if you bind something, you tighten something, and that would usually work better than something that was loose.
Yep, and that's often, that's except that it gets used in all kinds of contexts in prayer. Yes, if you bind something up, it will work better. Yeah, but that's the opposite.
But it's the opposite in prayer, and opposite in this, binding is forbidding.
But binding is forbidding.
Okay.
Yeah, so think bound in chains. That's what, and that's often used in prayer. We bind the enemy means to bind the authority of the enemy in prayer. Yeah.
Does this mean that a church today has the authority to bind, to allow, or
I think that's
not
what
allow
Jesus
things?
seemed to be saying, yes. And I think there is a sense of that in terms of the governance and the implications for the local church, but I think there's a cosmic sense of this as well, that in some way God has given the church cosmic authority to forbid and permit certain things and share in his authority in the heavenly places over the enemy.
Simply, if one church allows polygamy, then that's okay in heaven?
That's a good example of a good challenging example. No.
I shouldn't have picked polygamy because that is a,
Well, yes,
Mormons,
but you could pick anything. Yes, you could pick any topic that we disagree on. And churches have struggled with this. Where is the absolute line? What is a non-negotiable and what is a negotiable? And we can't even agree on that. But I think we have to get to the point where we go, well, what are the non-negotiable things that we would hold to as fundamental truths of the gospel? And let's at least uphold those and then be willing to be a little bit more gracious on some of the others.
But can there be fundamental truths when it seems in this verse we can pick and choose what we like?
There is fundamental truths. Our interpretation of them is the problem. And that's part of the grace of God, that he has willingly given his children, his church, his followers, a degree of authority, fully well knowing that we are going to botch that up sometimes and we're going to get it wrong.
Why would he do that?
Love.
Love?
That he is prepared to entrust us, just like a parent would ask a child.
Is it
How'd
love
go?
if I just let my child do whatever they want to do?
No, but it's also not your love if you never let your child have a go. Because
Good point.
Yeah, that's where I'm getting. That's what I'm thinking. So yes, it's not love to not have any rights and wrongs and any absolutes, but there are potentially some other areas where you go, you know what, this could work. Or you might have to learn the hard way, or this could work and it could flop. But have a go, and that's also a loving thing to do. So I think it's not an absolute all the time. But where we get ourselves into tension is when one church says something is absolute and the other one says it's not. Then we're going to have to work out, well, how do we get along with each other in that environment?
So what are the absolutes in Anchor Point Church?
I think I get asked this question quite a bit in different formats. And for me, the absolutes, there you go,
Okay.
are found in the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed. Beyond that, I have some that I would hold to as fairly important, very important. We have key values. We have true north values that we hold as very important for the life of our church, but they're not necessarily doctrinal absolutes. They might be. We might go, well, we need to hold these values in order to have unity and express the kind of church we want to be, and we have those in our True North booklet that explains those values. But there are also what we believe statements, which are fundamental beliefs that often are linked to the Nicene Creed.
So what would you do if you had this scenario here that you have somebody who is sinning, I suppose,
Yep.
or doing something wrong, and they're brought to you as
Yep.
the leader of the church?
Well,
What would you do?
Let's back up and see what Jesus says to do. The order Jesus says to do it is John has a problem with Mary. Mary's upset John for some reason, or John thinks that Mary's out of line. So John privately goes to Mary. I noticed you picked up and said that'll never work. Well, if John and Mary are married, it does work sometimes. Well, let's put the shoe on the other foot. Let's say Mary's got a problem with John, because that's more likely the problem. John's more likely to have made the mistake than Mary has. But Mary goes to John and says, let's personalise this. Jill comes to Rowan and says, Rowan, you are out of line.
Just pick a people. Yeah.
Rowan, that thing you said, that thing you did was out of line. Now, Rowan's not going to get, first impression is going to be, how dare you tell me what to do? But it might work. It might be that Jill's able to come to Rowan and say, Rowan, that behaviour was inappropriate. And if so, reconciliation. If so, restored the relationship. If not, in that situation, that's when, if it's escalating and there's no peace, that's when, in a situation in a church environment where there might be disunity between two people, the next step would be to take someone along. It's a pattern that he's illustrating here for how to have a relationship. Take someone along as a witness, not as a witness to gang up. That's what is often misunderstood. You're looking for an objective witness here who might be able to give some perspective, and the best way to do that would be to say to the witness who comes along, hey, could you come into this relationship? I had a chat with him. We're not getting anywhere. I'm striving for peace. I'm contending for peace. That's what I ultimately want. Could you come along, and you've got permission to tell me where I'm out of line too. I want you to be objective. I don't want the other person to feel like they're ganged up on. Go down that path. So your objective is peace. Your objective isn't just being right, like we talked about in the last episode with being taken to court. Then if there's nothing and there's no reconciliation at that point, the next step would be to escalate to church or church leadership. And this isn't stand up on Sunday. When this is tell it to the church, don't think stand up on Sunday at Anchor Point Illawarra and just broadcast from the microphone. Jill gets up there and says, I've talked to Rowan, he's not doing this, and embarrass her. And that's not what Jesus is saying either. So tell it to the church, tell it to the leadership, have the conversation. This is becoming disruptive to the church. This thing is out of line here. Always with this humility and this posture towards peace. And if for some reason Rowan is still not able to, even after talking to the leadership, and it's been measured and carefully weighed, the leadership might have to say, well, Rowan, you need to leave the church. You need to take some time out. We need to treat you differently because you are a source of disunity and unrest within our local community. And that is more important to us. So that's the process that seems to be advocated for here. That's what I mean when I say it doesn't happen very often.
No, I'm surprised by this because in the other verses we talked about earlier in the week, there was a lot of focus on reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
This seems that even though reconciliation may have been attempted, oftentimes it might not actually come about.
Yes, this seems to be indicating the times when reconciliation is not possible. Yeah.
Yes.
So even Jesus is advocating for that. Like I said in the last episode,
Make every attempt,
Paul says. And this seems to be one of those cases where you've made every attempt and there isn't still reconciliation. Well, Jesus is saying as a last resort, a separation from the church, a removal from the fellowship may be necessary. Now, in today's world, that doesn't carry much weight because the person usually removes himself. Very rarely do people need to be removed. Normally they remove themselves too early, get offended and move down the road, find another church. But in the first century, you left this church, you left every church. There's very often only one church in town. This carried with it a much bigger. You were separated from fellowship with the family of God. It carried with it a significant price. We read about in 2 Corinthians a man who Paul said had to be put out of the church because of his willful sin, actually enacting out what we're seeing in this passage. But even then, Paul says, hey, he's been separated, he's been put out for a time. Now bring him back, welcome him back because he's changed. So that's always the goal, always this peace, reconciliation goal, but this awareness that sometimes that's just not possible and some form of judgment, I suppose, some form of consequence will be necessary in order to maintain the broader unity. And that might require that someone is put out of fellowship or asked to leave the church. Maybe twice ever I've done this, and neither of them I enjoyed, not for a moment. But there's probably several other times when I should have done it, I would say, but I haven't had the courage to do it.
The courage to do it.
Yeah,
okay.
because I don't like conflict. I don't want to presume that I'm right, but hindsight has told me that I probably have acted too slow in asking this person to move on because in the absence of wanting to win them over or wanting to maintain peace, potentially I've caused harm to other people who were being harmed by that person.
So in consideration of what you're just saying there, what does verse 19 mean to you then? If two of you agree about any matter that you pray for will be done.
Good question. So here we need to bring all this binding and loosing and everything else down into the context of the local church. So what it seems to be saying is that this isn't Pastor Rohan making an executive decision to ask this person to leave, and in neither of those two cases have I done that. And usually it's been other people in the leadership team saying, Rohan, you need to let this person go. And I find every way, because I'm not a strong enough leader, I find every way to try and avoid that because I don't want to be that person. However, I think it's talking about this sense of agreement that when a leadership team, when a group of people who are entrusted and carry the weight of responsibility for the people in the church have made a decision and have asked God and prayed together and made a decision and gone, this is what we believe needs to happen for the greater good of the church, that's when Jesus is saying, I'm there in your midst, and therefore I'll back you as you make that decision. But the motive is not just to put that person out because they've caused me as a leader or they've said something nasty about me as a leader. That can never be the motive. It must be that this person's continuing in this behaviour is going to injure or hurt the sheep of the flock. And that has got to be the motive that I'm looking for, not my own personal offence.
You just spun something for me then. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there among them. From what you were saying, these people, the leadership team have made the decision to ask this person to leave. So if there's 2 or 3 of them and they're there in Jesus' name and there's been prayer and consideration about this moment, because we have binded, or bound rather, and loosened
certain behaviours,
based on those decisions, Jesus, who is head of the church, is there in this moment with them and supporting them.
Therefore, it's being ratified by heaven.
Okay. That is not something I'd thought about before.
Yeah, which is why I think it's good to see that this is the sort of stuff that's in the Bible you hope never have to happen, because this is not ideal. But this does happen in church life because we're all fallen human beings. But this is not I'm glad this isn't an everyday occurrence in church life, that you're not dealing with these kind of things all the time. But Jesus does contend for his truth. I mean, for his church. And the reason Jesus got angry and turned over the table with money changers tells me he's pretty passionate about his house. And so when we get passionate about his house, we're in line with what he wants. Sometimes that passion will require a discipline or asking someone to move on.
It also makes me think of the, Jesus leaves the 99 for the one, that when this person is no longer part of this church, Jesus is still going to go after them.
Yeah, and to some degree we should too. That's what Paul's saying. To some
It's
degree,
kingdom building, isn't it?
Kingdom building,
There
yeah,
can be
yeah.
Forgiveness and time taken out, and then
Yeah.
that person can always
come
come back
back.
in better scenario.
Which would
Situation,
to
better
fit what you're
situations.
saying there. I think even the way that you'd ask a person to leave the church needs to be open to a softness. This isn't tenable. This behaviour, the way you are acting or behaving is out of line with the values that we hold in this church, and it is we've made a decision that we feel it is not in the benefit of the church for you to continue in this church. But we want you to know that we're not against you. We're just saying we've tried to address this with you and it's not working. But if you come to the point where you realise that this behaviour you've had is not appropriate and you want to change and you're willing to change and repent and return and ask forgiveness, and potentially not even require you to ask forgiveness of the church and those that you'd led astray or hurt, if you do that, you'd be welcome back in this place. We'd be willing to consider that. I think that's different to this just dissing the person, just not you're out, you're done kind of thing. Part of the reason this never happens or rarely happens, Jeannie, is people tend to vote long before this. The pastor says one thing that upsets them and they leave.
Yeah, well, was it you, I think, who said people can be offended even before they walk in the front door?
Oh, yes, exactly.
Yeah,
well, it's
or
Andy
something like
Stanley.
that.
Andy Stanley says people can get offended a long time before the gospel offends them. Yeah. So, that's why probably this isn't happening as much as potentially it might have in the first centuries, because people get offended too easily and then leave. It's easy to leave. But back then they couldn't leave. They wanted to stay. That's, for many of them, it was their livelihood.
Yeah, it's not like they can just get up and move
Yeah,
cities or
that's
countries.
right. They've left their family to join the church. The church has become their new community. They do business in the community, all those sorts of things. So there is implications for leaving or being asked to leave that are massive. And that's why we should be slow to do it. And, they were certainly slow to do it. But sometimes it had to happen.
These sentences here really do show me that Jesus, as you said, is passionate about his church.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And who else is he in this moment? Who is he to you?
I think to go with what you're saying there, as he's zealous for his church, it shows he's zealously in love with his church, that he will be prepared to tell his disciples or advocate for his leadership to make some decisions that they don't really want to make, but they need to make. That tells me that Jesus really, his church matters to him. So he is the zealous leader of his church, and he will protect the weak and the vulnerable from those that are causing harm to the weak and vulnerable. And if he has to cause harm to someone, he will harm the perpetrator of that rather than allow the victims to be harmed.
You just said Jesus will harm someone. Is that what you just said?
Allow the harm to the perpetrator. Well, let's use the word justice, to bring them to justice, to prevent harm to the weak and the vulnerable.
I think it might be better to say it as Jesus recognizes the fault in that person, and then we'll go and work on that person until that person is able to realize that fault and be changed and transformed.
Let's use that. Good word. Yeah, which is the discipline. Let's
It's
use
a
the
long
word
way to
discipline.
say it.
No, the
Discipline.
word discipline. Yeah, that we talked about in the last episode. Discipline. Yes, discipline is harm. There's no way around it. Discipline is harmful. Discipline causes harm. That's what trains us. All discipline trains us. Is supposed to train us. So yes, I think it's not harm for harm's sake. It's harm for, what did you say? That purpose of restitution and reconciliation and restoring them. Yes, that's what God's after.
Well, by using the word harm, you offended me. So
Yeah, but I think you're right, because we take straight away.
I'm
take
out.
Harm. We're done. I'm done. I'm offended. I'm out. Yes. No, you're right. We take harm to be always in a negative context, but discipline is harmful. It depends how you define harm.
discipline is hard.
Okay, let's go with that. Discipline is hard. It is uncomfortable. It's maybe painful is a better.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Jesus harmed me, but the discipline that I go through is a hard and painful process, but it does not ultimately harm me.
No, it doesn't harm us. It might seem to be harmful in the short term, but ultimately it's restorative. It's certainly painful.
Yes.
So it depends on how you define the difference between harm and pain. You can have pain that, I guess you can have pain that doesn't cause you harm, but in the moment you feel harmed by the pain. But is it long-term restorative? And I think that's what Jesus is trying to get at here. Well, let's just finish on this. Jesus says, treat that person as you would a pagan or a tax collector. And you as
He
you were
did say
reading
that,
it,
yeah.
you were saying, oh, that sounds like dissing them or derogatory.
Yes.
But look at how else Jesus treats pagans and tax collectors.
Well, they're outsiders.
Yeah, and he treats them as outsiders who wants to come onto the inside, who wants to win into the inside. So even then, it reiterates what he's saying. This isn't a diss them and have nothing to do with them. This is treat them as though they're back outside the church, and now you want to win them back into the church.
Yes, because he does recruit tax collectors.
All the time.
And he cares much for the Gentiles.
Totally.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to see that was not a derogatory term. It was a treat them differently. Go back, treat them as they were before they were in the church, where you were wanting to win them in. Once they're in, there's a higher
That's a good
expectation
point.
for behavior. See, once some person signs up to abide by the church, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5, it's not my responsibility to judge those outside the church, but it is those inside the church. So this person presumably has joined the church community, has agreed to live by a certain value standard, a kingdom value standard that was beneficial to everybody else. For whatever reason, has stopped doing that and has gone through this potentially restorative, corrective process and has gotten to a point where they've said, the church leadership has said, this is not tenable. I'm going to remove you from the church. Now you're back outside. Now our job is to treat you like you haven't signed up yet, but we want to win you back.
I like that.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to see it.
I think it's a good way to see it.
Okay, let's go with that.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you, everybody. Talk to you tomorrow.